So the bottom line is that this is the x-axis, and this is time. Okay? And the first thing we draw are the arches for time. So if we have 60 minutes, maybe it's 60 minutes, maybe it's 3 times 20 minutes, whatever it is. We always start with time, and then within that you might have 3 smaller sessions. And the reason why we're doing this, like I mentioned yesterday, is to remind us that these are the frames that we can innovate in. This is the time we have. It's not like I need more time, I need less time, whatever. You draw the arches, you draw the time to remind yourself this is the time we have. What's above the line is what we know. It's what everyone in this room is an absolute expert at. It's the skills, the knowledge, the theory and the methods. It's what you do every day. You all deeply know your subject competence and your discipline. That's what you do. But where we struggle is under the line, which is the unknown. It's the values, mindsets, behaviors and values. And this is what differentiates Chaos Piles from all the other business and leadership schools because of our time based here. And at the Chaos Piles, in order to bring this alive, we always focus on context before content. And if you were to break it down what we do, we're looking at about 50% practice, 30% theory and methodology, and 20% focus on reflection. And 20% sounds like a lot on reflection, but when you're working with such high level expectations and actions and complexity, you need the time to reflect. Now the students are sick of reflection after the 3 years. But it's so important because the thing is, you have to create events that are worthy of reflection if you want them to talk about their emotional intelligence or their values or their behaviors or their actions and how they affect other people for good and for bad. It's how you develop to become a Chaos Pile is by getting these levels of feedback for when you're actually shining, when you're not, when you're supporting, when you're opposing. And then the idea is that when we draw the arches, when we set our arches, the concept is what is the value or mindset or attitude that we can bring to life together with the skills and knowledge in some sort of activity, practice. And then when we land, we're not only landing on the summative level in terms of the outcome, we're also landing on the authentic level, which is the process. Your actions, your behaviors, your growth, your values, your mindsets, attitudes, and so on. So when we are starting here, the idea is the more arches you have, the more time you need to set. The more arches that are landing, the more time you need for landing. And when we talk about landing, there's 2 types of landing. There's landings where we might just check out. What was your biggest takeaway from today? Did we learn what we set out to learn? Yes, good. But as learning designers, we should always ask ourselves, is there anything from a previous arch that we can build on and take forward? And the best example of this is always practice before theory, experience before explanation, context before content. So how little is a task or an activity that you can set to create the context for the content? So an example would be that if you are working with project management or business or leadership, that you could set a 24 or 48-hour challenge before you teach them anything about business design or leadership or project work. And then there has to be a second chance to practice. And if there is, then when you land this without any training, you ask them, what do you need to be able to do the next project? And they will let you know. We've tried this with 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 14-year-olds. They know. But you have to give them the context for them to turn their unknown unknowns into known unknowns. They need to know what they don't know. And they also need to know why it's useful, powerful, and relevant. And that's great, but if you don't give them a second chance to practice now the theory and methodologies, then they'll be forgotten. And the whole Chaos Piles is built on this balance of practice, theory, reflection, practice, theory, reflection. And sometimes you might have theory first, then practice, then reflection, then practice. And the reason for that is if the theory is quite loaded, like organizational development or systemic design or regenerative thinking, you have to give them some basic understanding in order for them to start working. But then you give them a higher level of knowledge later. Okay? So we set, hold, we land, we try to loop, we try to bring it forward if we can. When we draw below the line, it's to remind us that we have to sort of bring to life the unknown, the mindsets and values, but it's also about are we carrying an experience, content, learning into the next one. When we talk about learning arches, then this part is really important because we always want to meet them where they're at. So when we design learning, we should be designing to a capacity that doesn't exist currently in our students. And the opposite of that looks like our students could never do this. And if that is the attitude of the people you're working with, then you're in trouble. We have to speak to a capacity that doesn't exist, but trust that the content and the learning experience will get closer at least to this. And what happens is when we design learning, we're based it on assumptions and biases. So if we meet them where they're at through a boot camp or some sort of context, we can actually see that maybe their level is higher than we thought. Or it's lower. And if it's lower, we might have to work with early success, but still bring them to that higher ambition. But what if it's higher than we expected? Then we actually have to maybe increase the complexity or bring it in sooner. So an example here would be if you do an MBA and your first month is doing something that's 10 years old, something that you did 10 years ago. What sort of start does that start to a 2-year learning arch when you're already doing something that's so out of date and not relevant to the geopolitics in the world, the challenges, whatever it might be. So we have to meet them where they are and create the connection and the conditions and the context. Okay? Now, in your learning arches, when you're drawing, you can create as much detail as you want on the micro level, but also remember to stay on the macro level, because that's where the experience lives. That's the space you're holding all the time. And you could decide with the group of 4 you're in, you could do it in pairs. So 2 could set, 2 could land. So you can split off when you're ready and just design those separately, and then make up the holding as you go along. And then when we draw the arches, what's really important is that when there's bigger arches, and even in your 60 minutes, there will always be a major mid-arch point, 30 minutes in. So we draw these moments called mid-arch intervals. And what they're there to do is to remind us that even with our best intentions, we get so stuck in the content, we forget even ourselves to step up to this higher level to observe what's happening. So the idea then is when we draw these lines, we actually drop a line down because they always correspond with the landing of another arch. So now I'm landing this arch. I'm going, hey everyone, we're actually halfway through this block, this module. How are we doing? What's relevant? What's sticking? What would you like to go back over? Are we ready to continue? What do we want more of? Where are we coming from? Where are we now? Where are we going to? And just these reminders to students help them so much because all they have normally is a calendar and a curriculum that shows nothing of any type of learning journey whatsoever. And then, for example, when we get to this point, we're halfway through this period, but we're also halfway through the semester. So it's just a chance to bring everyone to this higher level and actually celebrate, acknowledge what people have been doing. And also, as a leader and teacher, facilitator, you now can look back at the assumptions you had and then readjust the complexity or the challenge or the flow.